Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is August 16, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Bill Doggett Jr. Bill, where in the heck are you calling in from?
Calling in from the Bakersfield, California area.
First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
In which regard, what's the best thing? Well, I would say in a philosophical sense, I would say the best thing is obviously to continue to stay focused on your how would I say, stay focused on who you are, what your idea, sense of purpose is, to feed your mind, your body, and your soul with goodness and good energy, and to, in times where it seems the appearances seem one way, to keep your, use the civil rights movement song, keep your eye on the prize.
Nice. Love
Thank
it.
you.
What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Well, I think that has to be spoken in a couple different ways. The written page, I grew up in a house, so you can see some of the imagery in the background. I'm a child of the civil rights movement. I'm the youngest son of a very prominent 1954 to 64 Los Angeles civil rights movement leader and minister, the late Reverend John N. Doggett Jr. So my first coming to information and to gathering and to understanding information were through pamphlets, newspapers, and books. So the old school printed page is really for me the best in terms of where I start. However, in our times, and that is in our contemporary times, my it's the Google is amazing. I'll just
Yeah.
say that Google's amazing, and then of course for people doing research, initial research, Wikipedia is also amazing. So yeah.
Pretty good. I agree with you. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
To understand the past, the present, and the future.
Oh, I like those three words. That was beautiful. That's Frank Zappa and James Joyce both said, all times are happening now. So I love that you included all that past, present, and future. Is this
Indeed.
need or want to collect information, gather information, more innate or more invented?
That's that depends on whose perspective. It's relative, yeah, it's relative. I think personally, for me, it's more innate. And and actually, I should be more truly transparent on that. Actually, it's much more situational. For me, it's extremely situational because when I was 5 and 6, we moved from a church parsonage into a beautiful older home that had been abandoned by well-to-do white people in the middle of Los Angeles, and all of the well-to-do professional African Americans, had made this enclave their home, which is Lafayette Square. And so, for me, gathering information coming from a history-oriented household, my parents being from Philadelphia, very much involved with history. For me, it was innate. So it's
Yep.
situational in my case. For other people, it can be different.
Yeah. Do thoughts create emotions?
Of course. Of
That's
course
good.
they do.
I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank. Um, I guess that's open ended there. Until uh, I get a sense of how I feel and how a particular idea or subject or story resonates, how it makes me feel. This whole the idea of the sensory respect of connecting to ideas and connecting to stories, I think is really really substantial and important.
It's good. Yeah. McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. But I think from what you said, we could say, I don't know what I think until I sense it.
Or feel it. Yes.
Feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feel it. Yeah. I think feeling how we feel things in terms of the sensory aspects of who we are as human beings, I think is pretty substantial. Also, I think that's cross life. I hate to use this word, but it's a kind of a Darwinist word, I guess you say. That's cross all mammals or all
Yeah.
kinds of people, animals of all sorts, from chimpanzees, I'm sure, to humans to dolphins, or I should say, obviously, from chimpanzee, dolphins to humans. I
Yeah.
think the feeling and the sensory experience informed so much of how we perceive.
Bill, this is great. You really get what we're after, and I appreciate it. Do you think humans are more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
Feeling, feeling
Yeah.
beings. I mean, look at what's going on today.
Yeah.
Need I say more? It's all
Yeah.
about how people feel
Yeah.
rather than how they think.
Can humans think without language?
Sure. Without language as in the printed page, but sure, of course they can. Yeah, I mean, if you were to take, like in my case, specifically, if you were to take me and put me into a desert island with nothing to read, no TV, no internet, no anything, I would think, yeah, I would think as I responded and related to the environment that I'm placed in, I would respond to the sunrise and to the sunset. So, yeah.
Chomsky says the language is not just words, it's culture, tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Bill, what do you do when language doesn't work, when language breaks down?
From an African American point of from an Afri diasporic point of view, place, um, when languages are disparate as they were before and during this transatlantic slave trade, it is the endemic culture that connects. So, for example, to use a very popular kind of tried and true, maybe a little tired cliche word, music is a universal language. So, music and culture, I think, certainly during this period of great trauma, the trauma of the transatlantic slave trade, Middle Passage, and the forced enslavement of Africans all over the Caribbean, Brazil, and the southern United States, that it was the remembrance, the cultural memory, not in words so much, but in the memory embedded in the mind and the feeling and how that memory and the recreation of that memory inspired and also inspired, informed, and sustained um, generations of people, as
Yeah.
well as individuals.
These are two questions from Alan Turing in the 1950s. The first one is thinking a function of the soul?
I would hope it is. I'm not a PhD in philosophy, but I wasn't prepared for these kinds of questions. But I would just say I would hope that the soul as a transmigrating soul through time, as in we do not live just because I'll just say we do not live just one time, that the soul that is transmigrating has in it certain elements that are universal and that do not change in that regard, and so that the soul thinks and rethinks about the experiences, and to kind of place it forward in a hypothetical place, I would say, is to look at the possibility of the soul that has left the body. I'm going to say very specifically um, that a soul that left the body during World War II through let's say, in the German air raid and through the fire bombs. As the body is no longer, but the soul is in the universe, in this expansive universe, And the soul may, in fact, seek out the a situation with the anticipated birth of a child in a same or different culture to have a new experience through a new window, if you will. So I think it's interesting. I mean, Shirley MacLaine talks about this, being out of body experience and the whole idea of reincarnation, I guess you would say. I think there's something to it. I think it's interesting. So
Yeah.
that's my answer.
Yeah, that was beautiful. And the great comedian Paul Krasner says, "I only believe in reincarnation in one of my past lives."
Yeah, I think there's something to it. I mean, in my
Yeah,
particular, I won't go into it today here, but there's a whole body of things in my background that I'm very engaged in and I'm very passionate uh, about that have no practical, real
yeah,
life experience or exposure. In my case, in particular, I should continue the sentence and simply say, people have asked me, in particular as it relates to my fine art photography. So, where does this painting expertise come from? This idea of art direction and composition and the use of visual space. Where does this come from? I had a great love as a teenager for German expressionist art, for
yeah,
Russian constructivist art, for French surrealism. Spent hours in museums. There was something my soul was connecting with. And then it
yeah.
became clear to me many years later, in my 20s, when I started studying film more formally at UCLA, then it just became clear. I mean, I was very clear that I had been here before, especially when I say that, especially working in silent film and in Europe, probably between the wars, because I had huge interest and passion about art direction, and I had knowledge of camera movements. I know
Nice.
about tracking shots, dolly, all the different kinds of. I said, how do I know all of this? I've
Wow.
never worked at UFA. In
Yeah,
my knowledge, I have never worked in. I never worked at Warner Brothers. I never met Carl Freund. I never met all the ex emigre, camera and lighting and cinematography people that came from Germany and Vienna or from Paris. But I had that knowledge base. It's kind of spooky,
yeah,
but it's there, and I'm really good at it. And people say, I have had people say to me on many different occasions, certainly you must have gone to Art Center, or the, I don't want to butcher it, but I want to say like Rhode Island School of the Arts or one of
yeah.
these,
Risk.
or
Yeah, yeah,
Pratt or something,
yeah,
because you have this studied expertise, which is natural for me,
yeah, yeah,
completely. There, I mean, it's a gift, but where did that gift come from? And it became very clear when I was at UCLA finishing. I started at Georgetown, but I finished at UCLA, and I should have had my minor in film history, and in particular in cinematography. I mean, I have a passion. I was already a photographer,
yeah.
but the photography was relating to art, specifically contemporary modern art, modern art between the wars, not let's say in the 40s or 50s, but specifically the art movements of essentially I'm going to say 1914 to 1930. Um, you put all that together, and you kind of, as an African American child and young adult, you begin to wonder, well, how there must be something more here. So
Yeah. No, it's interesting, and we're going to get into that. And just a few more philosophical questions, but again, it's more your hunch, like questions that sort of maybe carry. Well, that's a scientific question. Well, it's more like your hunch, your guess. What you're doing is great. The second Turing question is: can machines think?
uh, again, I wish you had let me know about these kinds of questions. I thought we anyway, about I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. So I'll
Yeah,
leave that there.
that's all right. In saying I don't know is totally fine. It's not. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. It's just like general. That's fine. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Interesting. I think my life is much more about having pursued meaning. um, to a fault and to great criticism. I'm the youngest child of my father and mother, and for most of my life, and even adult life, early adult life, um, I was not, my passions and my internal gifts were never appreciated or supported until I graduated. I gave myself permission to be this artistic self, which is foundational for me, which was very clear to both my parents by the time I was 5, 6, but was repressed
Mm,
because of the fact that they didn't want to give that voice for a whole host of reasons. But um, I gave it voice. So
good.
that's, yeah,
Well, I got it from Viktor Frankl, who says in Man's Search for Meaning that meaning lasts and happiness doesn't necessarily last. So there's
correct,
no
correct.
there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. so
You're
so
funny. Yeah.
yeah, so Audre Lorde, the poet, says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded to her, says, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Again, these really left field, heavy hitting questions. I don't, I'd have to think about that straight up. I don't know. This has not even been something in my consciousness to think about. I would say we all have particular tools to enhance and to maybe to expand the experience of the universe or expand let's say the what would I call it, to expand the understanding of subjects that we don't. I mean, everyone. I mean, this has been a big issue about uh, loss, not only loss from gun violence, loss from cancer, loss from the Holocaust, loss from the Black Holocaust of the transatlantic slave trade. How some there are many people, there are all these unknown, untapped gifts that can that are in their individual and collective ways representing new tools, but tools that have been lost or prevented from being realized. But as to your larger point about the transmigration of souls over time and over centuries, that some of that does represent itself, I think, in different epochs or eras, whatever. So,
Yeah. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
that's kind of personal. For me, money,
Yeah.
finance, career. I have. I'm. This is kind of a challenging time I'm going through in my life, and um, you know, I have a lot of gifts to offer. I have not always been understood um, in the field that I do have a passion about, and I'm going to reference something Gregor Piatigorsky, the famous cellist, who was so long associated with Los Angeles and with USC School of Music, talked about in an interview on KUSC about the importance of identifying and then nurturing your passion. So in my case, my passion is music and music marketing and enriching the experience of music for diverse communities, going beyond the Beethoven, Bach, and Brahms, but going into much more and being relevant and much more. And it's all of this what we call now DEI or EDI. DEI is diversity, equity, inclusion. Um, all of this work since the murder of George Floyd is out there. I can hit the ground running, but yet I'm over 40 and I'm black and I'm male, where the industry is prioritizing ages 25 to 35, um, and a little bit, I guess, not as experienced, more woke, more dreadlock, more pierced, more
I know.
tattooed. It would be if I was only a white woman, age 30, then I would be taken more seriously. But here I am. So my passion is important to me, and I hope at one point that I'll be able to do much more But like so much in life, when we talk about the transmigration of souls, etc., so much of life, for many, not for everybody, but for many, is full of zigging and zagging. There's no necessary direct line, unless you are just blessed that way. But in my case, in particular, there have been all kinds of zigs and zags and reconnecting, or the experience of the labyrinth or the maze. How do you get out of this maze, or going, and there are all kinds of philosophical responses to those experiences. Like, if you hit a wall, just go around it. Instead of trying to go through it, go around it, as one in example, for example. So
Very good. And Marshall McLuhan learned from the poet Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. And,
sure.
you're talking about photography, painting, music, all arts, writers. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we might learn to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So, Bill, I asked you the question McLuhan probed his whole career. Why do we humans ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Probably because there are those who don't want to embrace them or don't want to acknowledge them, I would
Yeah.
say, is probably the answer.
Do artists have moral obligation?
In this time period, post George Floyd, yes, they do. They can. And now it's also obviously very relative. Not everybody is in the same space, but I think generally speaking, yes, I think there is a moral obligation to speak a truth, or whatever the truth may be for you, but to speak truth, because we're seeing that not just in the our American post George Floyd moment, but we're looking at art and aspects of art, through poetry, through spoken word, through performance art, in this era that looks at the global connectedness of a shared experience around climate change, around the disaster of food insecurity. So there are all kinds of ways that one can express oneself.
I like you brought up the word truth. Louis Buñuel, the great filmmaker, said, "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it."
And
And
that's go ahead.
good. Yeah, just to finish out, and then there's the cliche that the journey is more important than the destination. Why do we have to seek a destination or name it if the journey's more important? And the reason I added the question to the Buñuel quote was 99% of people go, "That's great." And one person finally challenged me on the Louis Buñuel quote and said, "No, that's bullshit. If you're going to pursue something, you believe in it." So, there's a little gray area there. I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it. So, any thoughts on those ideas?
Again, really heavy hitting. I don't even know what to say. I was not expecting all of this, but it's all good. First, the journey is important, but I think talking about trying to merge these two thoughts, the idea of truth, and seeking the truth, but yet finding it and not embracing it, or not believing it, that is a relative. That's all relative. I mean,
Yeah.
if you are a human being, a spirit, a soul in the world who distrusts the ones distrusts him or herself or yourself in your journey to experience what may be the truth, and then once you think you have arrived at a truth, you disown it, then that's really relative and very specific to you. um, so I think, I don't, for me, I think there are two ways of looking at it on this level. I think the journey is very important, but someone who is clear about the journey and about a sense of truth, the destination and the journey are connected,
Yeah.
inevitably connected. I think both are important, but for some, they are connected, because if you are determined to have, if you have a sense of destiny, then the destination is, and what is it? I'm mixing metaphors here or something, but by any means necessary.
Yeah.
That's a Malcolm X. It's related
Yeah.
to Malcolm X, but by any means necessary. So connecting this thought, so by any means, the destination is significant and is the holy grail of my personal being and my life. So that is a destination of purpose. So all of this is, as I said, is, this is totally off the top of my head, my answers. But fortunately, I have, because I've had an art background, and I do have some background in philosophy, but I'm fairly grounded. Yeah,
Oh,
fairly.
this is
Whatever.
great. And it is like first step, thought, best thought. It's just intuition, impulse, perception. So are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Um, Probably old ideas, because old ideas keep us sometimes in our changing world, keep us too grounded.
Yeah.
The old idea, for example, the old idea where I live currently, it's a total Wizard of Oz tornado moment. I grew up in LA. I had a career in the industry. I kind of did something different around music, which had always been there in my life. And then I was in the Bay Area, and my professional life for the past 12 years is still in the Bay Area, even though I'm in Central California. Um, the challenge of the old idea for an African American male in the Central Valley, specifically in Bakersfield, the challenge of the old idea is that a black man is a maintenance worker. If you're lucky, you're a line cook at Denny's. Perhaps if you're even luckier, you are work for Coca-Cola and you drive a truck and deliver, setups to the various grocery stores. Or if you're really lucky, you are, you're a bus driver for MTA. I mean, that's the arrival here, the
Yeah.
perceptional. So that's an old idea. And then you have someone like me, even though I'm not from here, and it's a way station, if you will. People don't know what to make of me. The new idea, I represent a new idea. I represent a whole new experience that those who are caught up in an older idea and a mindset of who I can be, not of who I am, but who I can or should be, then that's an old idea that's very limiting as well as very destructive in many ways. So.
Bill, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
These questions. Um, sure. Let's see, which one. Um, I remember I must have been somewhere in my 3 to 6 months. I remember being in the bathtub with my toys. That's a memory I have.
Yeah.
My ships and my duck, my yellow duck. I've never gotten past whenever I'm like in Oakland has Lake Merritt, and me and my ducks. I mean, it's connecting back to then. I have this thing about I guess you're not yellow. Like the classic white duck.
Yeah.
With the not the fins, but the feet, the web feet.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have this thing for ducks. So anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a memory.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I think it's a blessing, hopefully.
Yeah. Tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, who had an impact on you, just briefly, like a role model, and what specific was that impact?
Sure. It wasn't in my family, it's outside of my family. It's connecting to what I do as an archivist today. I didn't know who he was until I was a teenager, but I had a sense, and this is, again, kind of a Shirley MacLaine-ish sense, again, throwing back to this idea of reincarnation and not having just one life. Um, That person was Arthur Schomburg, who was a critical key leading figure at the turn of the 20th century in the documentation of the presence of an African and Afrocentric culture through documentation. He's Black Puerto Rican. His whole goal, I mean, he was technically a librarian, but he was a historian and a collector who made a decision to refute the eugenics idea that Africans had no history nor culture, had never done anything. There's no evidence of that. And he began to create a physical evidence and documentation of the history and the contributions to the history. So he was someone that I identified with, and on another level, when I was young, and this is coming from the years 5.5, 6, 7, when I was given a chore when we moved to that nice new house. Um, I was given a chore to, I think twice a month or something. It wasn't every week, but I was given a chore on Saturdays to go to the master bedroom and take out these, I guess, trash cans or baskets of all of these journals and newspapers and magazines and throw them out. But somehow, in the middle of all that, I got this sense that because I was engaged as a little kid following, I had to tag along with all these civil rights events of my father and mother and all that. I think came to be a time that I understood that some of this material was important to keep. And I would take it down to the basement. That's how I'm telling you. I mean, this is a nice house. It was actually originally built in 1915. It was a house for a judge who had lived in the Bay Area. So it's expansive, nice, with redwood. I mean, it was beautiful. I mean, we were very lucky. I mean, this is not a tip. This is a statement of being essentially upper middle class, as I and other people were. Paul Williams, the famous black architect, was a neighbor of ours. So that tells you a little bit about. But where I want to go with this is that so I took this down in the basement, and I would separate into two piles: the stuff that could be thrown out and burned in the incinerator, or the stuff that needed to be kept. Now, much of that was kept until, unfortunately, we moved. My mother had some issues about throwing things away. But I was grateful to that. And in that time period, in that process, and I haven't talked a lot about this, but I am now, and I'm beginning, not just with you, but in other situations. In that process, I began to understand that this whole understanding of history and this idea of cultural memory and the preservation of cultural memory was not just me as a 5.5-year-old. So how did people have said to me in different times when I've retold this story over the past, let's say, 2 decades, and said, how does a 5.5 or 6-year-old know or understand the importance of preservation?
Yeah.
And so I was very clear that there was someone else. This was not just me by myself. So
yeah. And so then that was really good, because we're going to get into those after a few more philosophical questions. But within your immediate family, was there someone who had an impact on you, like a role model? And what was that?
I don't, I hate to say, but yes, okay. My grandmother, one of my grandmothers, my mother's mother, my grandmother Carrie. I don't know so much. I don't think there was a role model so much as that there was a kinship, a connectedness
Good.
there, and it represented something else, which I began to see later, as by the time I was 7 or 8, that there was this kind of unusual connection I seemed to have with elders. My challenge as a little boy was that there were no kids my age, if you will. And I was thrown into tons of stuff, and there was very few kids my age. Everyone was older. But there's some connection I had with the elder, as if in a previous lifetime I had sought out an elder or elders in West Africa. That there was this level of re-expression through the soul, if you will. So what we're talking about, yeah.
Beautiful. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Yes, I grew up in a Black Methodist church, or a Black, AME style church.
Do you pray?
Yes, I do. This whole past 14, 15 years, I would not be talking to you if prayer were not a staple, daily staple in my life.
If God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Um, I don't want to be trite, but job well done, hopefully.
Beautiful. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think evil uses people as a vehicle. We see that today, for sure. I don't think this one particular person I don't need to mention a name. I don't know that he is necessarily inherently evil, but I would say that this person, like Adolf Hitler, like Joseph Goebbels, and others, that their souls, wherever their souls were in a previous lifetime, that reimagined and reappeared through this particular body, physical body, brought a sense of something that, or I would say rather, maybe there's an intermixing of the two, but I'm going to say, generally speaking, I think more that evil, if we look at it from even go back into more of a scriptural sense of the idea of the devil versus good versus bad, or the devil versus Jesus, then yes, yeah, and to extent to that. So if light and dark, into the darkness, into the light, if light and dark represent good and bad, or the devil and Jesus, then the idea of evil as a form of representation, and goodness and doing the right thing as a form of representation, being manifested by the symbol of this one particular icon, or idea of an icon, Jesus versus the devil, then I think, yeah, I think they represent a particular point of view that, by ideally, in an idealized world or way, that they influence people for good and light, and they influence people for dark
Yeah.
or evil. So
The question that follows is, how do you, Bill, advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the samurai and the mob. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, Bill, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
um, this was way too loaded. I was not prepared for any of this. I'm just going to tell you, be upfront with you. Um, I would say to some of this, I would say acknowledging your enemy is not a problem. Being aware of your enemy is not a problem. Um, it is how you respond to them, and how you empower them to have power over you, is really the issue. That's probably his best of response. This is way, you're asking things of me completely out of the blue. I'm completely
Well,
unprepared to answer.
we're going to go into arts right now, in fact, but I appreciate that. It just gives background, and you've been very articulate. And You're
Thank you.
a brilliant wordsmith. So the way you've communicated your thoughts to me, I've clearly felt I was understanding them. And so
Thank you.
James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Like, why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, we can live life, but I think the idea is the idea of the movie, or I'm sorry, I'm going into my other background, Lichtspiel, which is the light play of light, is
Yeah.
a German version for silent film. So the or kino or cinema.
Yeah.
The idea of the cinema is to recreate, give the opportunity to recreate the experience of real life,
Yeah.
of living. It is just a form of entertainment or a form of recreating the experience that is that is easily available, but the manifestation and the creative I'm going to say the creative ideations of various different experiences manifested in a film through a camera, a sophisticated camera director's lens, through a cinematographer, through the direction of a very, through the direction and the point of view. POV is, as you know, huge in cinema. I mean, you can give the same story you could give the same story to Fritz Lang and the same story to Joseph von Sternberg and then the same story to Francis Coppola, and they will look different. They'll each be different.
Yeah.
So, so I would say that's the first piece. I think it's important not to lose sight of the experience of the actual native experience in real life. But I think if you look at the fact that is something that's not shared in the fact of something simple of climate and the seasons. So sometimes recreating life, what we can experience in real time, is important because that is the work of the authors who have recreated an opportunity for us to have an experience during the wintertime, during the inclement weather. That is the experience of Dostoevsky and of Chekhov and of James Joyce and Ernest Hemingway, forward to James Baldwin, Audre Lorde, etc. They give us the opportunity to have a real experience, but a real experience frozen in time. So.
Yeah. That was good. And you've walked us through some of your career. I'm looking for tipping points. Like, I love the story of you archiving the papers when you're throwing them out. It reminded me of Michael Oakes. He was working for Phil Oakes' brother. He's working for a big record company in LA, and they're throwing out all the promo photos of all the rock and roll greats and blues greats. And he's like, wait a minute. And he collected them and became the biggest archive, one of the biggest archives, by preserving that which should have been preserved. And I love that idea. I'm an archivist myself. So I love the story of you as a child sort of coming upon that. But I'm interested also in being a painter and a photographer. What was the tipping point when you said, I can do that? I'm going to pursue that.
Um, that's interesting. The tipping point, uh, gosh, I have to think this through. What was the tipping point? The tipping point was when I finished my undergraduate degree. I was the last person in my family to graduate from college. The tipping point was that I had been an artistic person all along, but all of that was repressed because I came from a middle to upper middle class Black traditional family. The goal was for me to become a lawyer, or in my case, my first 2 years at Georgetown, I was modeling my life to be or to become like Ralph Bunche, or like Condoleezza Rice, or like what's the Colin Powell. That was acceptable in the world of my family. Had nothing so much to do with who I really was, but it was acceptable. So the tipping point was when I finished at UCLA, and I'm dating myself. I was late, got out of there late. It was in December 1978, and I had already been expressing quite a bit of artistic self through inexpensive cameras. And by the period was real critical time period for me is 1974 to 1978. And I was at UCLA, and the tipping point for me was actually a really important piece of this story is the tipping point for me was being at UCLA and going to UCLA Royce Hall. And I'd had a background as a little kid in dance, in Eurythmics. And I went to see, and I've always been futuristic or into the modern. And I went to see, didn't know who he was. I went to see Alvin Nicolai's Dance Theater at UCLA, and I was completely blown away. It was totally the idea of Gesamtkunst, which is a German, it's associated with Wagner. The idea of the total branding, co-branding of art, music, visual space, choreography, sound, etc. Alvin Nicolai's was all of that, and his what would I call the pieces that he set, choreographed, and how he used this real, incredibly brilliant use of visual space and this very modernistic use of lighting. All of it was just spoke to me. And this was going on right at the time when I'm really beginning to study cinema, and in particular German expressionist cinema. And it's more about art direction. So much of the work I'm now doing is it's all art direction, as if and the connection I had as in my 20s with all of this and understanding camera movements and as I had been a camera assistant. I'm now getting that because I have way too much understanding of this. I'd never had any experience on any set, but I knew this stuff. So that was the tipping point, was the exposure to, actually, in an interesting way, to put it this way, the tipping point was the emergence of an acceptance of a inner person who had an artistic self that had been repressed externally by family conditions, but made a conscious decision against better judgment from my family's point of view to be an artist. In fact, that segues perfectly to the fact that I've barely talked about this. So I finished UCLA, I impressed people because I got a cum laude degree, and I wasn't really ready, but I got a full scholarship to MIT to be an urban planner, which is connected to the idea of the Ralph Bunche as being something. I decided I always liked architecture and building and creating. That was one of my biggest first things when I was a little boy. I grew up in LA, and for some reason, and again, this a priori idea, I do not understand it. My favorite buildings were the Pan Pacific Auditorium, were the Wilton Theater, were all of this very specific machine age buildings, this very theater, is it Thomas Loy? Theodore Loy? Raymond Loy, the famous designer. This whole streamline Bauhaus.
Yeah.
There were a number of buildings that were like this in Southern California during the 50s and 60s. Those were my favorite buildings. And I wish I had a camera then as a 5-year-old. And I still seek out some of these buildings that I remember as a 5 and 6-year-old. My favorite building, of course, was the Richfield building down across from the library that was torn down. I must have been in it as a little kid. I never will forget. I was away from downtown for a couple of years as my parents divorced, and then we got back there in '68. And my building was gone. I had identified it. That's my building. I never forgave them for tearing down my building. But but I'm showing my age, obviously. So, because most people don't know what the Ridgefield building was, yeah. So this it's interesting. So I gave myself permission. Um, so I went to MIT for a minute. And then I ended up. My father was in St. Louis. Came to St. Louis, and I had a camera. But I had previously been so engaged in art direction painting, and discovered the most important person ever for me, as I understand now. Wish I had met him. I met Bertolucci. I had a job for AFI, doing a special gala for Bernardo Bertolucci. But I wish I had met Michelangelo Antonioni.
Yeah.
Antonioni, for me, La Notte, L'Eclipse,
Yeah.
Aventura, Red Desert, his use of visual space and the
Yeah.
cinematography he's God. I mean, I would have killed to have met. I was living during. Fellini was alive. I mean, I think all of them were alive because Monica Vitti just died last year. But all that whole generation, Fellini, Monica Vitti, Antonioni, Bertolucci. I think De Sica but I had studied all this. But that I just gave my permission, and so I began shooting still pictures with a film camera using Kodachrome at the time. That was slides was a big deal. Kodachrome 64, and I'd walk around creating these images that people were saying to me, "How did you see that?"
Yeah.
I mean, you look at this work that I've done. Obviously, you went to film school or art school. What do you got your? Did you get your PhD in photography? Because and I'd never heard of Aaron Siskin before, and I was doing in the 19 early 80s my own version of Aaron Siskin. He
Yeah.
was working in the 50s. Franz Klein, very famous American painter, working in the 50s. I have work that I was doing in the middle 80s. I had not studied or knew about his work, but yet, that work, my eye, my visual, whoever I was, whatever essence that I was representing, and coming out through my camera lens was connecting to that. So,
Yeah. Bill, that was well done. You sussed that out so beautifully. And it follows up perfectly to a screenwriting teacher told me great art or great film, great photography, great book is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're not doing an assignment, you're doing a creative photograph or a creative painting? Because I saw some of your paintings online and they're amazing. So, in that regard, what role does intention play in the creative process?
intention creates the intention. The role of intention is that a decision to create, and the intention is to create how I'm feeling, or an expression of how I'm feeling. In my work, there are themes throughout my work that are consistent. The idea of window, is closed window. Closed window is a metaphor for hiding, or for being enclosed, being in jail. There are the ideas of hiding, alienation, disorientation. Um, what else would I say? Loneliness. Um, Much of my work is, in many ways, is autobiographic. So the intention is to express through the camera how I'm feeling. And just so happens that I have a painterly eye. And when I was at the height of my work as a fine art photographer based in Los Angeles, and I was one of the founding members of Black Photographers of LA, which was much more operational during the mid 1980s to the early 90s, when we had our first group exhibition. The one thing that people kept saying as they went through the gallery was, this is painting. This isn't photography. This is painting. And that kept being an issue throughout that time period. But, I just kept working, and shooting and creating. And it was the dream of dreams, if you will. I submitted to the Olympics, but at the 1984 Olympics Art Festival before the Olympics happened in LA in 1984 summer. And I was the only African American contestant to be in a juried exhibition called LA 84, hosted at the Brand Library in Glendale, to be part of that show. And it was at that show, and these were two images. One was done called Meter After Antonioni. It was done in Venice, California in 1978. And the other was done in St. Louis. And I titled it Hommage à Magritte, the homage to Rene Magritte. It was at that time that my father said to me, well, I guess it appears that you're an artist, aren't you? This is the first time you really accepted.
Yeah.
Once I was acknowledged and recognized on that level that he accepted who I was, which is a whole nother, it's a whole conversation by itself. But the other piece was that because of this intention and this manifestation of the intention, there was a cross connection with Alvin Nicolaius. Alvin Nicolaius, I had been following him since 1975 and 1984. He like myself, his ensemble like myself, were part of the 1984 Summer Olympics Arts Festival, and I went, of course, to his performance. I'm not sure if it was UCLA. I can't remember where it was, but it was finally intentional to go backstage and meet him. I said, you have no idea how important you are to me. It was like meeting Elvis. For some people, it would be like meeting Elvis. For me, he was a version of Elvis, and he signed my program, which I have, and I wish I had had more of a conversation. I think I had written him a letter, and I have my own personal archive, so I have things like that. But the intention was to make a decision to reflect my inner self through art, through painting, through photography. This is unique in my case. And this is the other thing that's coming up now as we approach 2023, 24, is that all of this work I did in the 80s and 90s, and I just put away because I kept getting all this pushback. This is not photography. This is painting. You're a Black photographer. This is what a Black photographer shoots. This is what the body of a work of a successful Black photographer is, a fine art photographer. You're a painter. Your work is much closer in a different way to the work of Romare Bearden, who's a collagist.
Yeah.
I don't use people, figures in my painterly photographs, but one could say that I was a student or studied with a student of Romare Bearden, and that would be accurate.
Yeah. Again, really well put. And Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. When you're shooting your photograph or painting your painting, how much are you thinking of your viewer?
Not at all. Not at all. I'm just thinking of what I'm creating and how it expresses something that I do. And when I see it, I'm looking at, wow, this is really amazing. And thereby my decision that it's amazing, then has an audience. But all of my work has never been done for an audience. It's only, I think that's probably true for a lot of people, from musicians to poets, to painters, photographers. They're not doing it for a commission. Many people only, there's that whole world of people that will only paint if they get a commission, or only will write a sonnet if it's commissioned. All of my work none of it's been paid for. It's just I decided to go out and create, if you will.
Yeah.
And I was lucky I was able, and I need to just finish this.
Sure.
And I was lucky I was able to do that at that time. And I'm when I say that in Los Angeles in particular, I'm working in the late 70s through the mid 90s. This is before what we're dealing with now. Many of the scenes I shot were in areas that would be dangerous now. They're all homeless impacted, but especially the deep downtown, Sante, and the areas that would be now considered kind of Skid Row or extended Skid Row. You wouldn't dare bring a camera down, especially post-pandemic. Which is sad. Someone had asked me, "Oh, with the pandemic, you must have done a lot of shooting." I said, "No, because I knew from Oakland that, for example, a mural artist, he died. He was shot to death. for his
Hmm.
camera. By someone who had been, I'm not being conservative or negative or sounding Fox News like, but it was a shame because he had made it an intention to create and to improve the experience of his environment by this beautiful under the foyer mural. And someone saw him photographing his mural. That's what's crazy. So I said, I'm going to be, and Oakland, unfortunately, there are, every place has its underside, and there's that element, and so I have not done. I would like to, but I know better because I don't. I know now, unfortunately, too, that driving into some of those places, and leaving my car parked, that someone will look in and see something that they think they see has money or value, they'll break my window. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I was able to do that. All of this
Yeah.
creating during that time period. So now I am re-examining, re-evaluating this stuff, and these are outtakes. The stuff that was in gallery shows and group shows. I have multiple duplicate copies of that, but I'm exploring and re-exploring all of these outtakes, and these outtakes are just amazing.
Beautiful. Really, I look forward to seeing some of that. And, McLuhan talks about how what humans invent extends some humanness, also called human sensorium. So, knife and fork extend our teeth. The shutter in a camera might be an extension of our eyelid. Funny thing, being cinema people, McLuhan said the cinema experience extends our foot because we're traveling. So again, there's no right or wrong answer. Even non-physical things like conscious religion or philosophy might be an extension of consciousness. What does the camera, the still camera, extend for you? What humanness does the camera extend?
It extends me.
Yeah.
Extends essentially who I am, all aspects of who I am, and more so the feeling, the sensory aspects, the internalized aspect. There was a photographer, for example, what's his name? Was it Jim? I can't remember his first name. It was Goldberg. He was working. He was very well known. Doing urban photography, particularly of people portraits in the 1980s. I want to say Jim Goldberg, but he did portraits and then he had his subjects write um, about themselves for their picture. And then he would have a way of, I guess, in the darkroom or wherever he had his prints made, he would combine the two. And that is what I see. And for me, that I will, in fact, perhaps for a particular show, do that for certain of my images, even though they are not, how would I say, they are not of people, but they are of scenes. But there are scenes that are represented that have representation value for me. So, so if there's so many philosophical things you brought to bear. So the leg is me.
Yeah.
The leg is me, and then I am in a related but different way as a student of film, but also as a photographer, as a painter using a camera. For me, the camera is the protagonist. You've heard of that. That's associated with Greg Tolan, who was the cinematographer for Orson Welles and Citizen Kane. Yes, I'm a huge. Bertolucci talks about that. If in the what is it in not the comp? What is it? His famous the C word. I can think of it in Italian, but I can't think of the Confession or something. His famous film. From I want to say it's the
You
film
mean
that said it.
conformist?
The Conformist. Thank you. I knew. I just haven't used the word. The
That's all right.
Conformist is the Conformist is brilliant,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and it's difficult, but it is all about the camera's protagonist. Greg,
Yeah.
everything about Wells, everything this not just Citizen Kane, Magnificent Amber, but more so. And I'm amazed that it was not a Wells, Greg Tolan shot film, and
Yeah.
that is The Third Man. Carol Weed's The Third
Yeah.
Man is brilliant. Orson Welles stars in it, but it's like it is exactly everything. It
Yeah.
is the epitome of the camera as protagonist. And so I believe that, I mean, directors and writers can use the creative lenses beyond just the page, beyond it's just the written dialogue to make a statement. And I'm one of those. So anyway.
Very enlightening, Bill. And it follows up good. George Manupelli, one of my film heroes, says, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says, there is no self expression. And the great jazz pianist Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. It's
Yes,
sort
I
of
agree
a,
with that.
yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
agree with
sort of
that.
a stupid question, but is art making more self expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technology, culture, or environments are dominant?
No, it's all. I think that's an old school idea that I'm going to share. Yeah, it's about self expression.
Yeah.
It's about self expression. There are those that use contemporary technology, like for example, like Pamela Z, very
Yeah.
well known kind of performance artist. She uses technology, but she's doing expressing herself in that way. Same with
Yeah.
Laurie Anderson. Same with
Yeah.
Meredith Monk. I mean, all these. You know where I'm going with it. So.
You're naming all my heroes. That's beautiful. Or, people who've inspired me. Can art, the real hidden question there is, can art making be egoless?
That's relative to the person. Because a lot of artists, past and present, had egos. You know, um, for me, it is egoless. But I have seen in my peers, in particular, one guy in particular. Well, I won't mention his name. He is so caught up in his ego and how many grants and how his access to this is more not so much about his work. It's more about how the power he has
Yeah.
to get whatever he creates placed. And I mean, it's more about who I am in the art world than what I
Yeah.
create. So
Oy, tell me about it. I won't go there, but there's this horrible statement. Someone told me that one of the art teachers at Cal Arts purposely taught bad because the students were potentially going to take his gallery space.
yeah,
you know?
sure, yeah,
And it was
I've heard
like,
that.
yeah. So my friend talks about music, the three T's: technique, theory, and taste. Technique, you know, your uncle's had amazing technique. He knew how to play it, he knew what he was playing. Theory, technique, theory. The third T is taste. How does one acquire taste, whether it's music, photography, or cinema?
That is so relative. You know that. I mean, that's not even a fair question to ask me. But I would say, I think taste is personal. It's based on your own vision and experience of what you're viewing or understanding. The viewing, listening to, reading. So looking at
Yeah,
that, because art is about viewing, listening, or reading. It's that's all relative. Taste
yeah,
is, taste. There is no cookie cutter formula for what is taste. Now we do use in our society, we use the ideas of good taste versus bad taste. This isn't good taste, this isn't bad taste. These are judgments, based on a certain set of constructs. But in terms of music taste, I, it's relative. I mean, there are people that love John Coltrane, and there are people that loved Ornette Coleman. There are
yep,
people that love Anthony Braxton,
yes,
or Cecil Taylor, or people that are even more abstract. And I'm trying to think of them, but it all depends. It all depends on what you like. Some people. My uncle's as a pianist, which is where he started. My uncle's piano playing for Lucky Millinder Orchestra in the Soundies that you can view on YouTube from 1941. He's much more in the style of Teddy Wilson. He's my
yeah,
uncle. If anyone influenced my uncle's sound, it's Teddy Wilson. It's not.
yeah,
It's not. It's not gonna. I should know. I know these other. It's not these other guys that are equally famous.
yeah.
Who
Art,
I should
Art
know up tip.
Tatum.
Thank
Art,
you. Yeah, you got it. I don't use his name enough. Art
yeah,
Tatum. Yeah, it's not Art Tatum. His style is clearly Teddy Wilson. Yeah.
yeah. That was good. And we could go into music on a whole nother level because of all your involvement, but let's stay on a couple of these. Your framing aesthetic, I'm curious because I asked a filmmaker once, how did you form your framing aesthetic? Like they say this, what informed your framing aesthetic? So before I give you his answer, because I think it's interesting, I'm just curious your answer. What informed your framing aesthetic for your paintings and your photography?
I didn't approach it just goodness. I think the honest answer is just my intuitive sense
Yeah,
that this is where I'm coming from with this a priori stuff. I mean, people have looked, at how I compose and frame
yeah,
and the
yeah,
use of visual space. People say, obviously, you went to Pratt, or you went to Art Center, or you went to, some art school because you have clearly studied. You're
yeah,
clearly a studied visual artist. Yeah, I mean, there's no way, and I'm not. I mean, I was. The only thing I will say is, so I came to this because my idea, if there's any influence, I think the strongest influence in terms of the framing piece is all of the visual language, the use of visual space from all of the art house films I
yeah.
studied.
There you go.
I think the strongest. Um, I continue coming. I mean, there are several things. I mean, the use of montage. I mean, you can go back to Ingmar Bergman's films, but I think if there's any, I think it's Antonioni,
Yeah,
Greg Tolan,
yeah,
Carol Reed. I loved, I was a teenager. I think I was just in high school. No, I was still in junior high school. I'm really dating myself. 1968, Fellini's Satyricon came out. I was blown away by the
yeah,
use of montage.
yeah,
The montage and just this collage of imagery and cinematography just blew me away. I think that led me. Then I was also the films that blew me. Okay, well, I'll just mention them since kind of talking about this. Films that blew me away and that really informed my artistic self further around
yeah,
the use of visual space. Fellini's Satyricon, The Seventh Seal of Ingmar Bergman,
yeah.
Robert Vini's Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
I've been waiting for you to mention that one. That
Oh,
is
that's
that's
huge.
what I thought.
Robert Vini's and Vini's, this cabinet, this cabinet, this Dr. Caligari's is a anchor
Yeah,
for me. I
for a
think
lot
I'd
of
have to. Yeah, I think if there were only two films that I would have to choose in terms of the idea of art direction and visual space, they would they would, and then it's a toss up on on the last one, but it would be the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and either La Notte or Red Desert
yeah,
of Antonioni. I
yeah,
am very big about the use of visual space and lighting. Now, also, of course, in terms of cinematography and the use of light, this is where von Sternberg comes in. Shanghai Express is amazing.
oh yeah,
Still amazing. I
yeah,
mean, study it and look at the how. Yes, I mean, I was just recently looking at this piece on YouTube, and it was very, all of these very famous film critics were reapproaching
yeah.
uh, the idea of the use of light, the use of what they called, I think, a painting term called chiaroscuro. Yeah,
Chiaroscuro. Yeah,
chiaroscuro.
yeah,
And then how he frames the scene, the busyness of the scene, the intention of busyness to distract, but also to make us isolate. So it's
yeah,
interesting. I mean, it's a whole, but I would have to say yes. The cabinet. I would say actually revising this, it would have to be three. The obvious three. The obvious three are Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, The Third Man, Carol Reed, and one of the Antonioni films.
yeah.
Those are my gods, so to speak.
Really beautiful. And so, you evoke. I asked Bruce Bailey, the great experimental filmmaker, how'd you form your aesthetic and framing? and he says, well, I'll go to Cocteau. Jean Cocteau said, I've learned my framing aesthetic because, like you said, paintings, photography, that had to contribute to us growing up. He says, no, the way the knife and fork are set at the table, that
Hmm.
formed his framing aesthetic. Because, you know, then
Mhm.
Robert Frank comes along and he frames like this. So it
Mhm.
leads perfectly into, I talked to Michael Apted 40 years ago when MTV was first breaking. And I says, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? And most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922, but it really flourished in the 80s with MTV to the point where Marty Scorsese says, I cut my films faster because of MTV. So he says, why do they feel so obliged to edit fast? In Michael Apted, who's a very intelligent filmmaker, said, because we've learned to take in information faster. So my question is asked with a bias. Can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Say it. Please repeat that because that was
Yeah.
deep. Please,
Can,
that.
can humans literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
I think both are true. Yeah, I think both are true. To make a really simple answer to that without being extended. So yeah, both are true.
Is it literally possible for humans to multitask?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the reality. You look at my life, and I will say this, just very transparently, you know, uh, I am at an age where I'm beginning to be appreciated as this multifaceted, multi-talented person. But most of my life, and especially most of my adult life, I was relegated as this jack of all trades and master of none
Yeah.
because I didn't fit a box. I mean, fat people were in a box. You worked for LA City Schools for 30 years doing this one particular job. You worked for LA County. You worked for the Sheriff's Department. You got your 25-year pin, your 30, you know what I'm saying? So,
I know.
but I've never been that. And I think that that was a problem for my parents in
Yeah.
particular. Because they had raised me to go traditional in this traditional trajectory and made a point my entire boyhood, my entire time, age 6 to 25. So that's a very significant period of time of creative realization. They that was suppressed. Who I was suppressed
Yeah.
because they had a different intention on who I should be or
Yeah.
needed to be for them. So, yep.
Bill, I asked for 90 minutes. We got about 10 more minutes left.
Okay.
Can you go a little longer, or you got to end in 10?
I think that we've. I
Okay.
thought we were going to talk about my other stuff, but
Okay.
I think we
And,
let's.
and I would love to have you on a salon where we can pick a particular topic. What was the motive of the cave artist?
Are you serious? Um, the motive of the cave artist, from my off the top of my head, is to think that it was to document was to create a documentation of their existence. But as well, that's one. And then the other thing was entertainment,
Yeah.
drawing as entertainment during hard weather, since many of them had to stay. There's a reason why they were in the cave to begin with. So it's both. It's documentation as a statement of existence to be found by others. That I was here, if you will, like graffiti, if you will. I was here, and then entertainment.
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Obviously, conviction.
Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
Anger can be a productive emotion when it leads to a expression of truth or leads to the recognition and a realization of truth. And I say that specifically, let's give an example. So someone would be angry. I am so angry at you that I could beat you to death because you represent something that I've always had trouble. You are the representation of something that I always wanted to be, but was told I was not given permission to be. Or in a deep, darker, and I won't mention it with me, but someone I knew, for example, had a older relative who was very abusive towards them, the younger person. And the anger really represented something else. And I'm telling a story. And the anger represented the fact that the younger person was born. When the younger person was born, the younger person took the attention away of the mother from the older person who had issues in their earlier life with separation anxiety. And so the anger was directed at the younger person because the older person could not accept or could not accept the existence of the younger sibling, because that sibling represented the how would I say, what's the right word to say, that younger sibling was a representation of the cutting off of a relationship that was so significant for the other older person. So the anger they directed at the younger sibling really was representational of something much deeper.
Yeah. Utah Phillips, a great folk singing activist, said anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Um, I could be flippant and say the rule makers.
Yeah.
uh, but I would say who's entitled to make the rules? I think we make our rules. We as a society make rules to maintain a sense of order. I think, like the framers of the Constitution. I mean, I'll put it in a contemporary way. The framers of I mean, that's obviously not contemporary, but when you look at it in today's, there are people, for example, there are people in our government who feel that the Espionage Act should be repealed. I'm going to say it. Rand Paul is all over the place about saying they must be. Why? Why is it? Because if you repeal it, then you can do anything, and it will
Yeah.
never matter. But the rule was created for a reason.
Yeah.
So that we behave. The Constitution was created for a reason, so we could behave. The impeachment exists in the Constitution for a reason. They created the rules to help the society maintain a sense of stability. So,
What's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
between rights and responsibilities, goodness, between a right and a responsibility. I think a right to do something is you have a right to do something, could be either good or bad. Responsibility for me has more of is more affirmative of the idea of intention to do something positive. Responsibility can be flipped on its head by someone who's interested in evil. And I'll put it in contemporary ways for this week as we're speaking. MAGA movement people feel that the Democrats are the evil people that are behind the replacement theory, allowing for this multicultural society. So anyone that tries to interrupt the ascension of their anointed God their Lord and Savior, Mr. DT, is seen as evil. Now, this is, from their point of view, their responsibility is to destroy all of these elements, these people that are keeping their intention of their false, their what is it, the false prophet, the
Yeah.
golden calf.
Yeah.
The golden calf represents this mythical idea that some have made biblical connections to.
Yeah.
This whole idea that's been all over NPR about this new wave of Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
Christian nationalism also connects to the Ku Klux Klan. And I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff to talk. So responsibility can be positive and negative. So I mean,
Yeah.
depending on who's doing it. But MAGA people are dedicated to the idea that it is their responsibility to save this country from the evil Democrats and the
Yeah.
evil multicultural people. It's multiculturalism. What is it? Orban said at CPAC. Race mixing is the destruction of the nation. And what is Marjorie Taylor Greene say, talking about the importance of embracing Christian nationalism? If you're a Christian, you're a white Christian.
Yeah.
There's a legacy of what white Christian nationalism means. So, and
Yeah.
it's right with us today as we speak.
Yeah. Bill, a few more and we're out of here. I really appreciate this. It's been truly enlightening. I've learned a lot. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
I would say, hey, you made it. You've come a long way. Congratulations.
Beautiful. How do you find peace of mind?
Today, through art, through creating art, through listening to music, through imagining. Music and art are very interconnected for me. Um, I have, yeah, I'll just say that. So music and art, and in other ways, just since my parents died, and since I am the youngest child who unfortunately had an experience, I've been estranged from my older siblings, but my experience during the time before my parents died and since my parents died, both my mom in 2009 and my dad in 2011, was really like being a Cinderella. If you know the story of Disney Cinderella, how the sisters just were terrible,
Yeah.
just really really cruel. That's part of my story. In my TED Talk, I have such a TED Talk to come. It's crazy. My story is unbelievable, but it's a story of incredible transformative resilience. And I use that word transformative resilience in very significant ways throughout, even through my writing, my professional writing. How transformative resilience, and the resilience that Maya Angelou spoke and wrote about in Still I Rise, that has been an anchor. So a sense of spirituality uh, that anchors me, and then the music and the art also play significant roles. So yeah, that's it.
What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
The cultural shift is the challenge. I'll tell you simply, the cultural shift that's happening is the recognition that we are one global family and are being forced to recognize that through challenge, through climate change, through the war in Ukraine, through um, the rise in fascism, the death, the recognition of finally with the unfortunate murder of George Floyd that Black lives do matter and can matter, and there's this long legacy of policing Black communities since the slave patrols in Charleston in the 1700s and 1800s have a direct connection to policing drama in contemporary America and Black communities, Black and Brown communities. I see this shift in recognizing and embracing our challenges and having the audacity of hope, to look at the possibility of a better future. That shift I find inspiring.
Last question. What gives you the most optimism?
You and your questions. Um, what gives me the most optimism? The the audacity of a number of people around the world to see how interconnected we are, and how the shared values for saving the planet on all kinds of levels over supersedes
Yeah.
our differences. And that's what inspires me, irrespective of the fact that you have cult like groups, the MAGA cult. You have groups that are obsessed with this back to the future. The MAGA is simply a reincarnation of the National Socialist movement.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, when you look
Yeah.
at all the trap, it's completely. I mean, the Goebbels is well alive in their group. So, but anyway, but thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation.
Thank you. Just to sum up, it's amazing because the first question is, what's the best thing for a human being? And my friend studied Wilhelm Reich, and he says, the best thing for a human being is another human being. And the last question, what gives you the most optimism, is what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he says, other people. So this commonality and shared conversation touched me deeply, Bill, and I really appreciate your time. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but I hope our conversation can carry on forever and ever. Thank you so much.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.